Could you talk to us a little bit about how the two-state solution is basically a fraud and how the Palestinian Authority is like an arm of the Israeli occupation?
Yeah. Right now, Tony Blinken is actually meeting with a boss in the West Bank. So this is what Israelis will say. They will say, no, Palestinians have their own state already, right? They're ruled by a boss, and then Gaza has Hamas, and they have their own governments, right? And we have nothing to do with it. They ignore the fact that Abbas is a collaborator with with the Israeli regime. Palestinians largely see him as just an extension of the Israeli occupation because he basically facilitates it and manages it on behalf of the Israelis. Um, the two-state solution is something that U.S. politicians continue to paint as a possibility. It is a complete facade. In fact, the Israeli political apparatus has not entertained this notion for decades. This was what the Oslo Peace Accords was supposed to present, was the second Palestinian state that has been completely eaten up and atomized with Israeli settlements ever since that moment happened. Um, because Israel refused to adhere to international law and they just completely didn't respect the peace process whatsoever. And so they just continued to take over, right, and to colonize the rest of what was supposed to be the future Palestinian state. This is something that I didn't actually understand because, yeah, we've all seen the map, the four quadrants of the map of the disappearing Palestine. But if you look closely, like when I say atomized, I mean it. It's like speckles of territory that are left because all the rest of it is settlements. And then you have Gaza over here, you have Jerusalem over here. Like, how would you even form, even if there weren't the settlements, like, how would you even form those three separate parts of the land together? Um, but it's an impossibility now because of what Israeli settlers have done, codified and backed, of course, by the Israeli state. And so right now, when I went to the West Bank and actually saw with my own eyes, I realized the compartmentalization of where Palestinians are housed. So there's three different areas, area A, B, and C. Area A is the only part of Palestine that is under Palestinian control entirely, and that's 17% of the West Bank. The rest of it, area B and C, is under some form of mixed, military law, Israeli martial law, and military occupation. And what that means is that the tiny specks of land that are under Palestinian control, you still need to cross checkpoints and settlements in order to get from one place to the other. So, how would that even work? Even if you did say, okay, this is all officially Palestine, it doesn't even make sense because you'd still have to cross Israeli territory and settlements in order to like actually live and go to your family and do the things that you want to do. So I think that it's understood widely at this point that there needs to just be a one democratic state where the 5 million people that are denied basic rights, 3 million people living in the West Bank, 2 million people in Gaza, the siege and occupation needs to be lifted, and those people need equal rights and democracy. And right now, that is of course not what we have. There's an apartheid regime, there's a military occupation, and then there's this siege that's brutally oppressing millions of people. And as I said, I mean, Israeli politicians have acknowledged that this isn't even a thing that they are entertaining whatsoever. So it is just laughable that even Bernie Sanders continues to hoist this notion up as a possibility. And in fact, the solution. It's absurd. It's absurd. And it's time that we face reality and it's time that we accept what reality is. And reality is that no, an apartheid regime that is oppressing 5 million people does not have the right to exist in its current form. Because when you have an artificial demographic that necessitates ethnic cleansing, that is not a sustainable thing. That's not tenable. So I think it's due time that we understand this. And it comes back to education because the vast majority of Americans have no idea. I think a lot of people will just be like, yeah, of course there should be two states, right? These are two states that have just been warring over whatever for so long, and we should just give Palestine an official state and just let them be. But they don't understand how impossible that already is because of Israel's actions. And so that's why BDS comes in, and that's why going back to the fascism in Israeli society, of course there are leftists, of course there are anti-Zionists, of course there are people who want to end the occupation and lift the siege. There's not enough of them to push Israeli society to the left, and there's not enough of them to rein back this fascism that's completely taken over. And all of the seats in the Knesset that are Arab, it's all tokens, right? There's no actual left-wing strength pulling this back. That's why we have to come in from the international community and take a cue from the Palestine Solidarity Movement and push and pressure and not only sanction. And no, we're not talking about sanctioning medicine and food and preventing Israelis from like eating. That's what the US does to countries like Venezuela. No, we're talking about, moreover, like politically isolating, culturally isolating, having our favorite artists and academics boycott Israel, making it untenable to even remotely consider yourself a liberal or progressive and actually step foot into the 48 territory. No, we're not going to let you go there. We're not going to let you hear the end of it. We're going to give you hell if you want to profit off of concerts, off of conferences, speaking tours, none of it. We're not going to have any of it anymore because for the last, I don't know, 70 years, Israel has weaponized this very real thing, which is anti-Semitism. That is a growing threat because of right-wing extremism around the world. They have weaponized this and actually flipped the narrative on its head to say that the anti-racists are the bigots. That if you object to war crimes and apartheid, you're the racist, you're the bigot. And that is not working anymore. We're not going to let that happen. We're going to put them on the defense now. They can't put us on the defense anymore. Now it's up to them to explain away why they support apartheid, why they support war crimes. And they can't dictate the agenda or the narrative anymore. And that's where we're at, Amar. And I truly think we have crossed the Rubicon here. There is no turning back. And I really do mean that this is the beginning of the end for the apartheid regime, because there will come a point where it won't be tenable for the US to sponsor this anymore. Israel's an extension of US military power in the Middle East. And once that situation becomes too much, the US is not going to do it anymore. Right now, Israel is, of course, very useful for them. They're a bulwark in the Middle East to do a ton of things, to tame all the Arab nations that surround them, to carry out operations, to be this strong military outpost for US imperialism. That doesn't have to be the case. That doesn't have to be the case anymore, because once pressure mounts here, and again, makes it impossible for US politicians not to take the right side, we're going to see that end. We're going to see that end. And I do believe it's coming soon.